As mentioned in my last video on Manny Ramirez, the second half of this series is going to focus on specific individual players who have shaped a lot of the discourse around steroids. And today I want to talk about Brady Anderson. Sometimes I consider renaming this whole series Justice for Brady Anderson, because I'm not sure anyone in the steroid era has been more unfairly maligned than he has. For almost everyone who believes in the steroid myths, Brady Anderson's 1996 season is their favorite go-to example of the amazing wonders of steroids. And that season is super weird. Going into the 96 season, Brady Anderson was a 32-year-old outfielder who had been in the league for 8 years, almost all with the Baltimore Orioles. And he was a pretty good player, but not anything special. He made an All-Star game in 1992, finished 4th in the league in stolen bases in 94. He had been mostly a league average hitter who'd never flashed much power. He never had a slugging percentage of even .450, for example, and never hit more than 21 home runs in a season. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, he hit 50 home runs in 1996. 50! To put that in perspective, over the 30 seasons prior to 1996, only 3 players had ever reached the 50 home run mark, and all of them, Albert Bell, Cecil Fielder, and George Foster, had big reputations as power hitters before that. And now suddenly Brady Anderson was reaching a mark that neither home run king Hank Aaron nor the Iron Man Lou Gehrig had ever reached. His slugging percentage that year increased by nearly 200 points from his previous career high. It was nuts. And since it was so weird, people now assume steroids must be the answer. But there are 2 major problems here. The first is that in the nearly 3 decades since his crazy 1996 season, nobody has ever come up with any solid evidence linking Brady Anderson to steroids. He was not named in the Mitchell report. He was not connected to Balco. No steroid dealer or user has implicated him. No former teammate or clubhouse employee ever said they saw him using steroids or doing anything that indicated steroid use. In fact, some former teammates, specifically Cal Ripken Jr., have stuck up for Anderson, insisting that his approach was no different in 96 than in previous seasons. He had always been a fitness-oriented player, an early adopter of serious weight training and workout routines. But Brady Anderson experienced no sudden change in his weight or body type that would indicate steroid use. He was never even listed at 200 pounds. Anderson himself has consistently denied that he ever used PEDs. The only evidence that has ever been produced against him in 28 years is that in 1996 he hit a lot of home runs, and that's weird. And apparently it's so weird that we don't need any other evidence. We're effectively saying, well, I don't know what else it could be, so it must be steroids. But that's the beauty of baseball. Weird things happen all the time. Players have crazy out-of-nowhere seasons every year in this league. Every season someone is having a career year, a year we'll look back on and go, can you believe that guy did that? And sometimes those years involve crazy home run totals. In 2009, Joe Mauer had one of the best offensive seasons a catcher has ever had, and he hit 28 home runs, more than twice as many as he ever hit in any other season of his career. In 2011, Jacoby Ellsbury got to 32 home runs, more than tripling his previous career high and double what he would ever do again in his career. Ellsbury's slugging percentage that season was 126 points higher than any other full season of his career. In 1970, light-hitting shortstop Bert Campaneris hit 22 home runs, even though he never hit more than 8 in any other season of a career that lasted nearly 2 decades. Even Roger Maris, whose 61 home runs in 1961 gave him the single-season record for longer than anyone else has ever held it, he never reached 40 home runs in any other season of his career, so that was an aberration. But for my favorite example of this phenomenon, you don't even have to look much past Brady Anderson. Just slightly further down the bench on the 1996 Baltimore Orioles was his manager, Davey Johnson. Johnson, as a player, had been a good fielding, light-hitting second baseman for most of his career. From 1965 to 1972, he had only once hit more than 10 home runs. Then, in 1973, much like Brady Anderson in 96, Johnson hit more than twice as many home runs as he'd ever hit before, getting all the way up to 43 dingers. His slugging percentage went up by more than 200 points from the year before, similar to Brady Anderson. In 1973, Johnson hit more homers than his teammate Hank Aaron and finished second in the majors in home runs, the exact same rank as Brady Anderson in 1996. In fact, the percentage spike Johnson had from his previous career high was 138%. Coincidentally, the exact same spike as Anderson had in 96. And just like Anderson, Johnson never came close to replicating that production in future seasons. His home run total fell back down to 15 the following year, and he never again reached double digits. Obviously, that's just a weird coincidence that two guys on the Orioles' '96 bench had such similar, strange career arcs. But the point is that coincidences like this happen all the time. Strange career arcs with brief one-year power surges happen frequently enough in baseball history that two of the most extreme examples ended up sharing a clubhouse for one of those seasons. That's what makes this game so special. And part of what I hate so much about these steroid myths is that they want to suck all that specialness out of the game. They want to take something cool, like some random guy having a historic season, and ruin it by saying it's only because of steroids. But seasons like that were not unique to Brady Anderson, nor were they specific to the steroid era. They are part of the beauty of baseball going back over a century. They've been playing this game for over 150 years, and things still happen every day that surprise you. But then a bunch of haters who never took a chemistry class after they were 16 years old suddenly come around and point to every crazy thing and say, oh, that's just because of steroids. That historic season, that's steroids. That weird turnaround, that's steroids. That fluke thing that everyone got excited about, that's steroids.
Whenever you feel shitty, that's because of gluten.
That's not true. Who the fuck told you not to eat gluten?
It's just true.
You don't even know what gluten
I know
is.
what fucking gluten is.
No, you have no idea
I
what
do know what gluten is. Gluten's a vague term. It's something that's used to categorize things that are bad. You know, calories, that's a gluten. Fat, that's a gluten.
But when you just insert steroids as the explanation for every unusual thing that happens, you haven't really gotten any answers. Which leads me to my second major problem with using steroids to explain Brady's 1996 season. One that bothers me even more than the first problem. Even if you stubbornly insist that steroids are the only possible explanation for what happened in 1996, you still haven't really explained anything. After all, if Anderson started taking steroids in 1996, then why would his home run totals fall all the way back down to 18 in 1997? Did the steroids magically stop working? Did he stop taking them for some reason? That's hard to imagine, given that they supposedly worked so well the year before, and 1997 was a contract year for Anderson, meaning a drop-off in power potentially cost him millions of dollars. It's not like there was some big crackdown on steroids or stigma attached to them that season, so why would he give them up after they'd done so much for him? And even if he had given them up, why would the effects of those steroids disappear so quickly? In other words, steroids don't really explain the real issue with Anderson's 1996 season, which is that it was so exceptional compared to the rest of his career. The answer is that sometimes the stars just align for a player and he goes on a crazy run for one season. We don't always know why. The fact that Anderson's spike was a one-year thing is why it's so mysterious, and steroids don't explain that part of it at all. Not to mention that we don't have any real evidence that he was even on drugs, and we have tons of examples of other players in different eras experiencing the exact same phenomenon, like Davey Johnson, Ellsbury, and Campaneris. But the reason people latch on to Anderson's exceptional season more than the other ones I mentioned is that Brady Anderson was the only one who reached the 50 home run mark, which was previously hallowed ground that seemed reserved for historically great players. And so Anderson was seen as unworthy of this level, and therefore a poster child for players who were supposedly hitting more home runs than they were, quote, worthy of hitting in the 1990s. Guys like Luis Gonzalez and Shawn Green and Greg Vaughn. Steroids have become a way for fans to apply their own little demerits to players like this, who have stats they don't approve of or think they were really worthy of. But as I mentioned in previous videos, the reason for that is simply that the 1990s were a much more home run friendly environment than previous eras because of changes to the ball primarily, and has nothing to do with steroids. Offense was up and home runs were just easier to come by in the 90s, so guys you wouldn't necessarily consider great hitters did put up gaudy offensive stats. Putting this another way, a player's home run totals are only partially under his own control. Yes, talent and hard work play a big part, but so do your team's ballpark dimensions and your era and the ball and just dumb luck. When a player's stats don't line up with where we think his talent is, fans now have this urge to just say, oh, it must be steroids that explain the difference. But more likely, it's some combination of luck and material circumstances. And it's worth pointing out that once those material circumstances changed, that is, after the offensive environment in baseball got so home run friendly, we started to see a bunch of so-called unworthy players with really high home run totals. That 50 home run mark was first passed by Brady Anderson and then Luis Gonzalez and Greg Vaughn, and then later by Ryan Howard and Jose Bautista and Chris Davis, none of whom are likely to sniff the Hall of Fame, and yet they don't raise the similar suspicions. Mark Trumbo led the majors in home runs one year, as did the other Chris Davis, who was out of baseball just a few years later. None of these players were ever firmly tied to steroids because steroids is not actually the reason that some mediocre players put up crazy home run totals. But because Brady Anderson was the first guy to do it, remember, because of the strike, 96 was the first full season played with that juiced ball. And since Anderson's season came in that first full season, he gets unfairly tarred as a suspected steroid user with no real evidence. This is how these myths work in practice, as a way of slandering guys who often never did anything wrong based on misinformation and rumors. People end up ascribing all sorts of magical abilities to steroids to explain away every strange thing that happens on a baseball field, even when there's no evidence either that the player in question used steroids or that steroids could even explain the thing they are supposed to explain. Sometimes we have to accept the mystery.
Please, accept the mystery.
Sometimes I don't know is the right answer. Sometimes we really don't have the full explanation. Mysterious things happen in baseball. That's what we love about the game. It's not something to be inherently suspicious of.